Hello, hello, and welcome to the Elevated Frequency podcast and live stream session. I am Shannon Morse, and I'm sitting here with the lovely Lisa Kirby. And I always feel pretty pumped after that intro music starts happening.
Yes, same here. I had a lovely dance session today to very similar music, so it feels pretty good.
Yes, it does. All right, you guys. So today we're going to dive into a very, very big topic, especially around this time of year, which is dun 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 dun. What is it, Lise?
Booze, alcohol, wine, beer, liquor. Yes.
That's right. And this is a huge topic. We discuss this very frequently inside of not only our own lives, but especially the Green Door with our clients and our coaches. And so there's just so much to share around this topic. Lise, how would you like to start this out?
Well, I love your explanation of what alcohol does in the body. And I remember learning this first from you and being really mind blown because all we really hear, or at least from my perspective growing up, was, oh, actually, like wine and beer can be really healthy for you, and drinking in moderation is totally fine, and there's no adverse health effects, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're watching TV at all, it's like every other commercial is about alcohol. So learning how alcohol is metabolized in the body was really shocking to me. So maybe just kicking off of like what alcohol actually is and kind of cutting through the BS marketing and just giving it to people straight.
Yes. Well, in case you didn't know, alcohol is a toxin.
Yes.
It is literally a poison that we are putting into our body. It's in smaller amounts, not like there aren't many things that we put into our bodies that are also toxic, but alcohol is one of the predominant ones where we consume it regularly as a culture, and it is glorified. So alcohol is glorified, and alcohol can be fun, and it can be creative, and it can be, a total party, obviously. I bartended for 10 years, so I have a really deep relationship with the whole culture of alcohol, and I've also done a lot of my own experiments with and without the substance. So alcohol is essentially, the process of it is digested in our liver. So our liver is responsible for so many functions. And inside of our context of the Green Door life, which is health, body composition, performance, all of these things that all of us are striving for inside of the Green Door, when we think about alcohol, we're like, okay, well, if you really want to see body composition change, the best thing that you can do is essentially skip the booze. Like, there really is no way to soft sell it.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, if you really have some significant goals, stop drinking. And that's the reality. However, you can also achieve goals while you still have alcohol in your diet in moderation. But what we're asking me right now in terms of like the mechanism of alcohol is when we consume alcohol, it is digested in our liver. Our liver has hundreds of other functions, one of which is fat metabolism. So what happens when we're drinking alcohol is our body recognizes it as a toxin and as a VIP. So instead of moving to do its other functions like fat metabolism, like absorbing nutrients from the food we might have gotten, like ridding itself of other toxins that we might have accumulated throughout the day, instead it goes full force on how do I get this thing out of my body? And so some of its other roles start to shut down. How that relates to our experience is inside of muscle building and fat loss and performance and mental clarity and sleeping well and all of these things is really, really imperative. And I could just keep talking about it because there is so much to share. So I'm going to volley the ball back to you in this way, or else it'll be just a pure stream of consciousness around this topic. But so for you, Lise, when you first started to understand just the mechanism of alcohol being the VIP, what things did you notice and what were kind of like the initial discoveries inside of that started to come up for you?
I noticed, first of all, just understanding how alcohol worked. The the kind of tagline that stood out for me of, okay, when I am drinking, I am not burning body fat. When I am drinking, I am not burning body fat. When I am, even if I'm done drinking, when it's still metabolizing out of my system,
Mm-hmm.
and you think of the half-life of alcohol for each drink that you have, I am not burning body fat. So that's what kind of like the actual truth of what's happening when it was metabolizing. That was the aha moment for me, and that really made it easy for me to make different decisions, because I had thought previously, oh, if you just budget for it with your overall caloric intake, it doesn't matter. And what's interesting is like, yeah, that might have worked in your 20s, maybe your early 30s, but especially for women, we're already at a disadvantage because we don't metabolize it as well. The more fat tissue you have, the less good you are at metabolizing it. That's also another interesting factor. So the if you have more muscle mass, you're actually better at metabolizing alcohol faster, which is like kind of annoying, right? Because it's like if you're trying to lose body fat and still want to drink here and there, you're actually really better off just taking a break from it to get to your goal. And then I would recommend building up your muscle mass instead if you want to incorporate it back in your life. So I kept repeating that the science behind it, the truth behind it. And I noticed, just from slight reductions of it at first, I just had more energy. My periods were better because there's less estrogen in my body. I didn't realize how terrible I felt until I cut it out. And that's what we hear often from our clients. We'll have a lot of people start working with us. And my favorite, just like myself, oh, I don't drink that much. Oh, you won't even see alcohol in my food logs. And it was like every single night, like wine, wine, wine. I'm like, okay, I drink a lot of alcohol. And just like the tracking process brings it into your awareness of how much you are actually consuming. So the other aspect that I found kind of shocking was how long it took to metabolize out and have your liver kind of recover days later after one drink. And so it kind of felt like I'm putting in all this hard work with eating healthy and exercising, and it just started to feel like alcohol was undoing all the hard work and effort I was putting in. So it was an easy shift for me in that sense to start minimizing it, and then ultimately taking really long breaks from it and just feeling so amazing that it was easy to not do it as much.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And to your point, you started to discuss about, the length of time that it takes for our body to actually rid itself of alcohol. And when I started to kind of dive into the impacts over periods of time, especially when you have like multiple days in a row where you're drinking like 2+ servings of alcohol. And for those of you who are listening, when we think of a serving of alcohol, it varies depending on the type of beverage that you have. So if you are drinking hard liquor, it's 1.5 ounces, which will be like a shot glass. If you are drinking a glass of wine, it's going to be 5 ounces. If it's a beer, it's usually 12 ounces. And they all approximately have the same caloric impact. But, and this is a huge thing, and I become that really, really annoying person when people are selling alcohol to me when they say that it is carb-free. And I'll be like, really? Is it calorie-free too? And they say, no. Well, where are those calories coming from? That is the question. That is one of the things that in our culture, and this is why I really am a proponent of, kind of asking deeper questions. Well, is that really true? And what is actually happening here? Because we get told things, especially in the health industry, and if we just blindly accept it, then we're not actually understanding what's really the impact. And so this is the same thing with alcohol. So the FDA doesn't require us to put protein, carbohydrates, or fats as any sort of nutritional information in alcohol because alcohol isn't considered a macronutrient, because we don't require it for survival. That makes sense. However, the calories are not free.
Yeah.
And this is something that we deal with a lot. So inside of our programs, we either track alcohol as a carbohydrate or a fat. but it still breaks down in its closest form into a sugar, so you can track it as carbohydrates. And I find that that's it's more effective, and it gives you more wiggle room, because there's not a lot of wiggle room with fat, generally speaking. So what I found fascinating, Lise, is looking at, clients who come in, and also in our own lifestyles where we were like, okay, I'm not going to drink during the week, right? And then I'm going to have like a couple drinks on Friday, and then a couple drinks on Saturday, and then I'm going to have brunch with drinks on Sunday. If you have 3 days back to back, it takes your brain alone 5 days to start into recovery. 5 days. And then it's Friday again. And so you're like, wait a second, huh? And your liver, it's going to take a little bit longer. So this is something really for us to keep in mind. If we do have the goal of performance, fat loss, muscle building, good night's rest, because alcohol is such a big factor with that, understanding that there's a compounding impact as well. So when we understand the compounding impact, we can start to strategize, okay, if there is a compounding impact, then how much rest does my liver need in order to not be oversaturated with the toxins so it completely shuts down, so that I can start to strategize, just a drinking schedule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's that compounding factor is so important to consider as well, because then, as I mentioned, then you're putting in all this hard work in other areas of your health and nutrition and exercise, but then you're not going to get anywhere if you keep drinking every single weekend and your liver is just never in tip-top shape. The other thing, a lot of clients will say to us, well, how do people in Europe, they drink wine every day, they have it twice a day, they smoke cigarettes, and they live long and blah, blah, blah. And so my kind of theory behind that, and theories that are floating around, is that the standard American diet is we're eating way more calories than we're burning in general, which means we have more fat tissue, which now we know we don't metabolize alcohol as well, which means now it's like a double whammy. So we're not metabolizing alcohol as well. And if you're drinking alcohol, then you're not metabolizing your body fat as well. Mm. And then you add on top of that just the environmental toxic load in the US versus Europe. Mm-hmm. So in our food, in our environment, whatnot, and our stress is higher. We have less of that kind of community connection overall, and we're not walking all the time. So when you add all these lifestyle factors and toxin factors, if the liver is sluggish and overloaded with toxins, and we're not moving, and we have less muscle tissue, and we're more stressed, you add all these things together, it's so clear to me that that's why we can't operate like that. I know every time I have traveled abroad, there's just a feeling of just a more relaxed atmosphere. And so I totally understand how that can work for different cultures. Mm-hmm. But in the US, it's almost, what I was exposed to growing up, and I'm sure most people, is like we were saying, the glorification of alcohol, where it's, you're weird if you don't drink. Mm. You have to have an excuse. It's either you're pregnant or you're an alcoholic. And so what I always like to kind of consider, and just kind of self-reflection, and then also asking with clients, is could you stop drinking for a bit if you wanted to? And maybe you don't need to classify as the DSM-4 or 5, psychological definition for alcoholism to stop drinking. What about just taking a pause just to see if it has a certain control over your life, or you're using it as a temporary stress relief that mm-hmm. actually is causing more anxiety and stress that we now know over the long run. So these are some of the things that come up inside of our programming, which is really fascinating, because, if you're not aware and kind of thinking about your alcohol intake, you might just keep going and not even thinking twice about it,
Absolutely. And this is a perfect segue into a little bit of personal experience, right? Because that Lisa and I I hope you guys know that Lisa and I really don't talk about things that we haven't tried out ourselves and used ourselves as guinea pigs. I believe it was in 2018, my partner and I decided to stop drinking, and we thought it was going to be for a month. but it ended up being 9 months. And I had so many discoveries. And to your point, where you're thinking, okay, maybe I don't have, the regular alcoholism tendencies, and I don't drink that much. But what I started to notice, and this was hilarious to me and also a little sad, was why I had this question in my head. Why does my family have these brunches whenever I'm hungover? Like, why? Like, what part of the universe is making this a thing? And then I realized that's because I'm hungover every Sunday. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, something to look at. And it wasn't, necessarily extreme, but at that time, I was still like bartending on occasion, and it was part of that lifestyle. And to not drink in that experience was weird. Could be weird sometimes. But what I learned through just taking that time out of that substance is exactly what you're pointing to and what we see clients go through, which is learning how we actually are without this additional chemical reaction that's occurring. So, one of the things that I discovered as well was that I thought that I was a person that was hyperactive, that I couldn't sit still. Right. I was like, I'm not a sit still kind of person. I just like to be moving all the time. And sometimes that's true. But then I actually realized, no, I was just anxious. And actually, I'm very good at sitting still when I choose to. I can be very present. And I also thought that I was a total people person. When you
Yes.
are,
Yes.
right,
Mm-hmm.
when you're drinking, you're like, I can talk to anybody. And then when the alcohol is removed from the picture, you're like, oh, but I actually don't vibe with everybody.
Right.
And there's just this mask that comes over. And I actually prefer to recharge alone sometimes, and then sometimes with other people, specific people. So there's so many of these like little discoveries that are had inside of choosing to go without it as well. But then we've also learned strategies of how to integrate it into life and continue to see the results and continue to be in social experiences and environments where it's like it becomes a choice, not because we're feeling something that is stressful or that we feel like we're supposed to because society is demanding it of us, or if you're in sales because you think you're going to make the sale. If you are if you're participating in alcohol, that's a really common misconception, I think. So in terms of strategies that we've kind of developed and learned over time, Lisa, I would love to hear what kind of strategies that you have developed for including alcohol when you choose, and how that kind of has affected your muscle building and fat loss and body comp and everything.
Yes. I would say number one, first and foremost, was changing the type of alcohol. So wine in particular was my go-to alcohol of choice. Once I got to like motherhood in my 30s, it's just like it almost felt like a rite of passage. Like, oh, when you become a mom, you're going to be a heavy wine drinker, and fully supported and really pushed by that whole community, really, and very normalized. And so that was always my go-to. And what I've learned through this education is that wine is one of the hardest for women to metabolize, because you have this double whammy of alcohol and fructose from the sugars in the wine that only your liver is able to metabolize. And once it overloads on that stuff gets converted into fatty acids. So it's like, again, like wine to me, when I think of wine, it's like straight to fat. That's what I think of now. The other thing I noticed when you stop drinking wine in particular, the sugar cravings can increase dramatically. And you really have to manage and kind of push through that. So once I stopped drinking wine, I have not had wine in it's been like 3 or 4 years. It's been so long I can barely remember. But once I pushed through that first year, all of my sugar cravings started to reset. I used to be a sugar obsessed person, so I thought that was also really interesting. So anyone who is struggling to reduce the wine and then has like chocolate cravings and sugar cravings, just know that it's normal and you kind of just have to work through it to let your body reset.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest switch was going from wine to mezcal. And thank you, Shannon, for introducing me to mezcal. It is in the family of tequila mezcal, coming from the cactus plant. So it is more of a fibrous carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that mezcal in particular will not spike your blood sugar as much as other alcohols. So just that switch alone, I've noticed a huge change when I do drink. It's like, few and far between these days, but when I do drink, it's only mezcal, and I don't see a huge impact in my body composition. I also think of, when you think of a serving of mezcal on the rocks or just neat, the amount of volume of liquid compared to like a giant 2 glasses of wine or 2 beers is so different, right? And like this little thing of mezcal almost feels like more like a tonic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just not like fermenting in your stomach the same. It doesn't come with all these added sugars. So I've experimented as well with like vodka again, and it's just not the same. It is not the same at all. I've had vodka, just one serving, and I felt like crap the next day. Mezcal, I don't know what this magic juju is, but it is the least worst of all the alcohols. Would you agree with that, Shan?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, so much yes. And also, we were talking about this earlier, but because mezcal is created in the small batches, it is very, very intentional in the process. Even from when they harvest is on a full moon. I was like, wow, it is such an intentional process. And I think of mezcal now as more ceremonial than anything else. And it's always so fascinating to me because I do feel like we respond to different alcohols in different ways, also based on where our ancestors are from, right? If I drink vodka, because I used to love martinis, if I drink that, I am smashed like, very, very quickly. I'm like, you wanted someone to dance on a table? Give me a martini. Otherwise, I will be sitting having a deep conversation with someone. So I find that really fascinating about how different alcohols will affect people differently. For some people, mezcal and tequila, it doesn't suit them. And that's a really interesting thing. But with mezcal, personally, I mean, tequila and mezcal, if you don't know this, they have it's stimulant properties. And so instead of feeling like a depressant as like beer and wine and some of our other hard liquors would, it actually has this stimulant effect. So I also enjoy it because of that reason, because when I drink other alcohol, I tend to get a little bit sleepy. And with mezcal and tequila, I'm like, ooh, it's like a coffee, but with like a little extra something. and I was going to mention as well that about like sugar cravings. The sugar cravings when people stop drinking in general is normal for all alcohol. Just so everyone knows, it's not just like wine. It's going to be if you stop drinking and you've been drinking regularly, 1 to 2 servings, 2 to 3 days a week or more. When you remove that from your diet, you're removing this sugar from your diet, and your body's going to be like, well, where is that sugar that you've been giving us? So it's going to have to adjust. So sugar cravings are really, really common. And when we share with clients, when that's coming up for you, keep drinking water, make sure you're getting enough protein in. That will help to balance out your blood sugar levels. Make sure you're getting complex carbohydrates to kind of fuel some of those cravings. And it's normal. It's just kind of part of the game. Like night sweats are normal. When you stop drinking because your liver's purging, sugar cravings, sleeping better, more stabilized emotions, mental clarity, being nicer to people at work, your family members.
That's the double-edged sword, right? It's like one of the realizations I had was, wow, I really don't like these people when I'm sober, or I don't like this type of event when I'm sober.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me more picky about who I was spending time with and what I was doing, and my tolerance for like just doing things I didn't want to do or finding any joy out of. I just don't do that anymore. So
Yes.
to me, if I'm going to an event nowadays where it's like the sole activity is drinking, I'm like, boring.
Yeah.
What else do you got? Like, what else? There has to be something else. I think the other aspect too is if you're drinking, I saw this quote somewhere and it really resonated. Like, if you're drinking to escape your life,
Mm,
right? If you're drinking for stress management and to just check out and to really escape your life, when you stop drinking, you have to face that. You have to face emotions and a lifestyle. It's like you're sober and you're aware. So now you're like taking responsibility for creating a life that you love.
mhm.
And that's not always easy. It's not something everyone wants to do. It was really easy to just kind of check out and be in that, you know, little slightly buzzed state.
Yes. And it's a really, really good aspect of the whole conversation to bring up because alcohol is used for so many self-soothing mechanisms. And I remember in my teens, one of my very good girlfriends was caught smoking pot in the bathroom, and she was sent to AA meetings and NA meetings. And I went to support her, and I was surrounded by all of this group of people that was going through AA and NA for about 2 years.
Wow.
And just kind of watching not only the people who really did have like an addiction experience, but also the people that didn't, but then were being surrounded with that environment, which was really fascinating. So, what I think I'm getting at here is that when we're looking at alcohol and how we're talking about it right now, we're talking about it in the context of when you don't necessarily have like an alcoholic issue, like a deeper issue, which really is more like sometimes chemical and psychological. And those are things that we're not really speaking of in the moment. But when we do have this middle line relationship with alcohol, when it is part of this social experience that sometimes the pendulum just goes like a little bit too far and we forget why we're drinking in the first place, that's when we can kind of start to go ask these questions and like realize these things. Hey, if I keep it out of my experience for a period of time, what's revealed to me? About who I am and how I like to be and how I like to surround myself with what kind of people and all of this stuff. It really becomes like this fascinating discovery. And and then I also wanted to talk about the strategies that we actually use when we are drinking.
Exactly, because now it's much more intentional, right? So
Yes.
the first would be mezcal or tequila if it works for your body and your metabolism.
Mhm.
The second one would be making sure that you are eating before you drink. This one was also a big one for me
Mhm.
because, as we know now, again, when alcohol is in the body, it prioritizes the metabolism of alcohol first. So if you have a glass of wine and some other food going along with your dinner, your body is going to be tending to getting the alcohol out first before it even is absorbing the nutrients, the macronutrients and micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals from your food. This is what's so fascinating, as you'll see, like with people who are true alcoholics, they actually are malnourished because their
Mhm.
body is not absorbing those nutrients. So my personal favorite strategy, I've played around with this a lot. I really can't drink and eat at the same time.
Mhm.
It does not jive. Most alcohol will cause like a gut disruption to your like microbiome, and I just find that when I do it together, it just never works for me. I get like indigestion. I don't even want to drink. I'm like, it has to be one or the other. So what I do is 30 to 60 minutes before, if I'm planning on having alcohol, I will make sure to have at least protein and fat, if not a little bit of carbohydrate, because alcohol does still spike your blood sugar. I will have that after. So I have this nice baseline of steady blood sugar. My body has absorbed the nutrients from my food. And then I have the alcohol and I just let it run through my system. And then I will make sure to eat a full balanced meal, a couple hours later after I feel it move through my body and I'm sober. And then I will make sure to have a nice, nutritious meal. And that's been the absolute game changer for me.
Yes. Yes. Massive thing, because if we are drinking and eating at the same time, our body won't effectively absorb the nutrients from the food. And then this is also an interesting thing, because I always like to look at these things like it's not good or bad,
Yeah.
right? So if you want to be buzzed, then yeah, drink on an empty stomach. If you want to get buzzed fast, that's the strategy. If you don't, okay, so here's the other thing, is that we'll produce an enzyme that helps to metabolize alcohol. And that enzyme that's produced is not produced when we are in a fasted state. It's only produced when we actually have like food in our stomach.
Right.
So in order for that to happen, this strategy that we impart, which is having, a balanced meal with a lower carbohydrate intake, just like Lisa said, like you said, 45 minutes to an hour or so before consuming it. So you give your body some time to digest. So it's not trying to do two things at once. That allows you to not only absorb the nutrients of your food, but also enjoy the alcohol.
Yes.
But then again, if you want to get a little buzz, then drink on an empty stomach and then have your meal later, and then just, choose to not have the enzyme in your stomach to help to metabolize. And then the other thing that I thought was so great and helpful, just as a reflection, is that when we crave fat at the end of the night or the next morning, it is a very normal thing to crave, because that fat is helping to protect our organs from the alcohol seeping into them. So when I realized that, I just had such an additional appreciation for how freaking smart our body is.
Yes.
Because when we crave certain things, there's usually a reason, it's always trying to balance itself out. And that part's always, I just love learning those sorts of things about like our natural tendency,
Yeah. And the other big one too is hydration. I feel like this is the duh strategy, but we have to say it.
Yes.
Alcohol, unlike coffee and some other things, there's diuretics, and then there's things that actually dehydrate you. Mm-hmm. So diuretics makes you urinate more, but often those things like coffee or other caffeinated beverages, they have water, like liquid in them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like what you're peeing out is being replaced. But with alcohol, it doesn't work that way. So you're actually dehydrating your cells. So we're inside of our programming, we are really on top of water intake and hydration in general. It's not just how much water you're drinking, it's your electrolyte balance. So how's your sodium, potassium, all your electrolyte levels. But what we find is that just by in our programming for our clients who are tracking their water and their food for a given time period, they're already more hydrated. So when they do go into these experiences of drinking alcohol, the impact is minimized because they're so on top of it. They're already hydrated. A lot of people are walking around slightly dehydrated. And so if you add alcohol on top of that, your organs are working overtime, your liver, your kidneys. And again, it just makes it harder to lose fat, harder to absorb the nutrients in your food. So just that strategy alone, like we have a lot of clients that talk about double fisting, but instead of 2 alcoholic drinks, it's your alcohol and then a glass of water. And really, again, it like getting to the point where you can have a drink and be like, that is plenty. Like you're going to be a cheap date. Your tolerance goes down. You don't need as much. I just think back to the money that is saved from not, buying bottles of wine every week. It's just incredible all around. And if you are even just like sober curious, I say, try it. Just like try it and see how it impacts your body and your mental health. But so that would be kind of the other strategy is make sure you're hydrated, obviously, well before you start drinking and then afterward.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that you just coined the phrase sober curious.
Well, and I love hearing about like the next generation is already not as interested in drinking.
Nice.
As our generation, millennials, even Gen X, which I think is really interesting. They're growing up in a world where, some of our more like plant medicines and other things that were considered highly illegal or toxic, we're actually finding like, actually, those are not toxins.
Right.
Alcohol's the toxin, and they're already privy to that. So
Yeah.
there's a bunch of sober bars popping up, which
Which is
I think is
awesome.
so cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to share here before we sign off is in a little bit more detail. If you are someone who really enjoys cocktails and you're like, okay, well, how do I make, these cocktails and what's the impact of that? Something that we see a lot, and especially because I've made a lot of different cocktails in my life, is that when you add alcohol, just like what Lisa, you were sharing about with wine, that you have this alcohol and sugar combination. Okay, well, also with cocktails. So if you are having a Manhattan that has sweet vermouth and whiskey or bourbon or whatever you're having it with, if you're having any sort of like fruity, lemon drop or martini or sex on the beach or whatever it is, where it's alcohol, fruit juice, some sort of liqueur, and you're combining them together. These are the double whammies that are going to really compound the work that your liver has to do and make it so much harder for your liver to recover the following day. And this is another reason why, if for whatever reason, like tequila or mezcal isn't your jam, either your body doesn't like it or you're like, I can't stand the taste of it, and you're looking to substitute with another alcohol, then it would be another hard alcohol. It would be like, try to get a really like small batch and better quality, whatever you do, try to do the better quality option of vodka, or I would say gin is probably my least favorite, because it is very, very hard for the body to metabolize gin. And a lot of what we see when we look at alcohol is, think about what it's being distilled from. Is it a grain? Is it a grape? Because that thing will show you the glycemic index that it's being distilled from, right? So you'll see that the things that are being distilled from grain and from grapes are from higher sugar, you're going to have a harder time, or it's just going to have a higher sugar content on its own. Same thing with beer.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you are choosing to have hard alcohol, choose it neat with some rocks and then just be done with it.
Yep.
Soda can be like a second best cousin to that option if you do choose that. But I would not have screwdrivers. Like, don't do vodka orange juice. That is a recipe for disaster. And the last tip that I'll share here, because this is one I used at the bar quite frequently, is if you consume water with a little bit of either fructose or some sort of sugar. I used to put pineapple juice, like 1/10 pineapple juice in a pint of water, and I would drink that, an hour or so before I would have an alcoholic beverage, because there's sugar in that helps to pull the water through your system and hydrate you immediately. I would also do this with people who were very, very intoxicated at the bar to help to hydrate them more frequently and quickly. So, and then they would come back the next morning and be very grateful that they were hydrated again. So
Oh, that's too funny.
It's
You're
kind of
like,
like
yes,
a little
here's your screwdriver / not.
Yes, tricks of the trade.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good.
So good. Well, that was a lot of information. I hope if you are going to be enjoying the holidays and choosing types of booze, or whether you're going to partake or not, this has given you some additional strategies.
And wait till you show up at the next party or family event and you're having your glass of mezcal on the rocks. Everyone will be like, what?
You're having what?
Yeah.
There's definitely a little bit of an edginess when you order that drink.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you so much, Lise. It's always a pleasure and so fun to do this together. And thank you for everyone who is watching these. And again, please share whatever you would like to learn more about. As you can tell, Lisa and I can talk about these things for hours and hours, but we try to keep it to 30 minutes.
We try. Yes.
We try. Yes. And we will wish you a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.